Let's open our word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this beautiful day. Pray that you will bless our time together and always help us to keep in mind, even though we discuss some pretty heavy topics about what's going on in the world, that you are in control and you are preparing things in the world ultimately for the return of your Son. And we look forward to that. Bless us today in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, if you live here in Central Ohio, you know that we've had a pretty good week. I have one of my friends I play golf with every week. His brother is a farmer and had said that until this week, we had not gone 5 consecutive days without rain for over 3 years. And I believe that if you look at the quagmire in the commons area behind our backyard, it's pretty muddy. But we've had a beautiful week of weather, and it looks like today. So I don't know how long ago today. I don't think I'll go a couple hours like I did last Sunday just because I preached first hour. Today we're going to talk about supply chain. And I picked the words carefully because we live in a very, what I think is going to be a difficult late summer and fall. At least that, and there's a number of things. So I don't say these things to scare you, but to warn you and inform you of what I see going on and how I think it plays into Bible prophecy. These are some of the channels that we're on. There is an app for Remnant Truth Network. You might want to download that. We're in the process of working on our own app, but these things in a small church where we're all volunteers take longer than we think. So, but you know, at some point we may be kicked off these platforms. That's the way that it seems to be going. We talk about the convergence of events, how fast things are happening, and I use a grid, and I talk about it every week because it just is something so you know where I'm coming from. We know that when we get closer to the end, that there will be an acceleration of things happening in the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. That's based on a pattern as to what happened at the time of Jesus' first coming. There were all these prophecies from Genesis chapter 3 up through the time that the canon closed in 400 years before Jesus was born. But there are even some people in Israel who had been given knowledge by the Lord that they were going to see the Messiah of Israel. But as Jesus came in fulfillment of prophecy, there were many prophecies that were fulfilled throughout his life. But of all the prophecies that were related to his first coming, those were fulfilled about 60%, 59, 60% in the last week. And that's kind of interesting. So there will be an acceleration of these things happening. And just like there's an acceleration, all these things are being fulfilled in very short order, there will be a convergence. So I've likened the convergence of all these lines of Bible prophecies sort of converge at a point in the future. That's the purpose of this slide, is to try to show that. I just can't figure out why. It's almost like we're in a wormhole and we're speeding through, accelerating. And so as we get closer to the end, there's a convergence. And as these things all are happening at the same time, I would expect that it's almost going to be like the vortex of a tornado. And as you know, things in the vortex of a tornado are fairly turbulent. And this will be like a category 10, an F10 hurricane when everything's come close. Then there's logistics. We'll talk a little bit about that today, that there are certain things that need to be put in place for all these prophecies to be fulfilled. I was listening to some people talking about that on the way to church this morning. They're talking about, is Babylon going to be rebuilt in Iraq or not? And so there are a number of people, good people, that believe, yeah, it has to be rebuilt for prophecy to be fulfilled. But others say, no, it doesn't need to be that way. I kind of lean towards the latter myself. But we'll see. But if Babylon has to be rebuilt as a great city, there's virtually nothing that's been built there that has anything to do with a final revived future Babylon that would be the greatest commercial city on the planet. It's just not going to happen. Unless maybe it's virtual. We haven't even, there's a lot of things that can happen virtually now that never had before. And then understanding as we get closer, just like as we get closer on the eye chart, things get clearer. Even if we have bad eyesight, the same thing will be happening. And this comes from Daniel chapter 12, 11 and 12. And I heard, but I understood not. Then I said, "O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" And he said, "Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. And many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand." So as we see these things coming, and again, this is another area, I listen to a lot of different people. I read a lot of different books. Believe me, there's a lot of different opinions about how everything fits together in a sequence. So I think we all need to be humble. I have my own views, but I look at other views and consider them and weigh them as to how likely I think that they're going to happen. But we certainly know that there's a convergence of things that are happening and culturally, that type of thing. For example, we know that Jesus said in Luke chapter 17 that it would be as in the days of Noah and as in the days of Lot. When we go into 2 Peter, I think it's chapter 2, and read about Lot, we know that Lot was vexed by what he saw going on around him in Sodom and Gomorrah. So I think the good, if you see what's going on in the world and it vexes you, praise the Lord, because you're getting it. If it doesn't bother you, then you need to, what's the phrase we use? Wake up! Wake up, because we're getting closer. So, and I hope nobody had a heart attack when I did that. I had a pastor friend, and he was talking on End Times Bible Prophecy, and he had someone blow a trumpet. And I said, he said, "I'm not doing that again." Because somebody heard it and fainted, and he just said it didn't go the way that I had planned. So it was an interesting example, but it was in the execution. So this is the way things happen. So we're going to look at some things today. Things are spinning quickly. It was not even, 7 years ago that Obergefell decision was decided, legalizing same-sex marriage in the United States, making it a matter of constitutional law. It was a horrible decision. Should have been something debated in public and voted on, but they upended millennia of religious history to accomplish something that made people feel good for a moment. And God is not mocked, but now it's been almost 7 years. The length of what some people, we term the tribulation period, although I don't think that's necessarily a scriptural term. But, first it was same-sex marriage. And remember, we talked about it, and there were some people in their opinions in the Supreme Court that said, I don't know if we thought this through. There might be some things happen by enacting this that essentially will open a can of worms. And that would have been Scalia and Alito. And that was, in a sense, prophetic, because it sure has, hasn't it? Now we have boys competing in women's sports and women or trans men who dress like a woman being named Woman of the Year. So I guess it's okay to have men competing in girls' sports because we don't like girls all that much. And I'm against it. I'm against that stuff. It's crazy. So we'll see how this all goes. So let's look at some of the things going on, and we'll start with the transgender debate first. Now, there have been a number of states, and this is happening in the UK as well, with some of the rules about medical care. There's a controversy in the UK about what should we do with, particularly hormone blockers and children who have not started puberty yet? Some people say, well, just give them hormone blockers, and if you change your mind later, we can just change our minds 7 or 8 years later, and everything will be okay, right? But usually what goes along with the hormone blockers is what? What I can only term physical mutilation surgery. And there are many stories now of, say, young girls who had top surgery. That means they had their breasts removed. And they regretted it later. And then what do? And they've gone through these puberty blockers. And you'll see all these articles. You'll see these journal articles from the American Medical Association said that they're not aware of any problems with giving puberty blockers to prepubescent children. Really? I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. And so when you see something like that, you say, well, listen, Romans chapter 1 is a God's judgment comes on people when they get so far gone that they become reprobate. In fact, I posted on my Facebook page a picture. I didn't grab it for today. It was a big sign banner and people marching, because there's marching all over the place now about the anticipated Roe decision in the Dobbs case overturning Roe versus Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood, that said repro freedom, reproductive freedom. But I said, well, maybe they just should add, but it was REPRO. So I just add BATE to that, and you've got the biblical thing about what's going on. So they're putting in laws. Alabama has a law, Texas has a law, I think Louisiana might as well, that essentially have said you can't give these things to children before they go through puberty, because it can make them sterile, because they don't do informed consent. We do a lot of things these days without informed consent, but on this case, because it could make you sterile. You never will be able to have children. Even though our Congress passes laws that say we need to respect the rights of all birthing people to give birth. Well, all birthing people they were all women. They're all women. No men are giving birth. But then there are the transhumanists that say, and then I saw an article this week about transplanting wombs into men so they can give birth. And sorry, ladies, I'm not for that at all. So in Alabama and Texas, they have this law that says you really can't give these type of medications to young children. In Texas, they had a ruling in a court that said, first, a lower court said, you can't do that. You can't ban that. You need to respect the rights of privacy and the patient to the care that the patient wants. Like that's all of a sudden a concern in this country and in the world. As I've said, if hypocrisy were water, the world would drown. But now in Alabama, a federal judge came in and said, yeah, no, you can't have rules like that. You can't have rules like that. That's not right. Here is a picture on the left. I spared you the video. This is a drag queen who was crowned prom king in an Indiana high school this week. And that's okay, right? And everybody was, it's on, go to Libs of TikTok and you can watch the video doing that. On the other side here, we have this thing about rules. This is from a publication called Parents Defending Education. And what it's about is about a 12-year-old girl. Her daughter in middle school was invited by her art teacher in Fort Collins, Colorado, to come to an art club after school. Now, the family was new to the school. The daughter didn't have many friends, and they thought, well, this is great. She's artistic. She will like art. But unbeknownst to her, the daughter, or the mother and father, the club was actually a GSA club, GSA stands for Gay Straight Awareness Club, run by the art teacher. On this particular day, a guest speaker was brought in. Her name is Kimberly Chambers. She's the director of Splash, with all capitals, Youth of Northern Colorado, the arm of Splash organization that targets children between the ages of 5 to 11 is called Skittles. Chambers is a paid employee of the County Department of Health and Environment, and she's also a substitute teacher, and this is her picture from her social media. And so they talk about all the stuff they're going to do. LGBTQIA plus teens 12 to 18. This was done under the auspices of being an art club. And so their discussion, you see this? This is one of the discussions they had at this splashschool.org or splashlocal.org. Polyamory and relationships. This is for a 12-year-old. You okay with this? Nobody in their right mind is okay with this. Here's some other posters. I said a friend in Colorado sent this to me. Our numbers rose 500% in the last year as we began programming in person again. We have a lot more opportunities to connect with young people who need genuine connection now more than ever. A space where youth 5 to 24, along with their families, can feel safe to connect with other youth. This is an inclusive LGBTQIA. And I read through a lot of this, and I never got to the art part. Never got to the art part. On the right side of the page is a thing, here's a program they had a year ago, Relationship to Sexuality. Join on Zoom, splashnoco.org, sexual health, for youth ages 12 and up. But it's clear when you look at some of their materials, they're going after younger children. And here's some of the things. Gay GSA, this is what they mean. SAGA means Sexuality and Gender Alliance. QSA can mean Queer Student Alliance or Queer Straight Alliance. Younger grades often call, see that? They're not just targeting 12 and above. Younger grades can call them allies clubs, diversity clubs, or pride clubs. And when you go to their website, and you'll find that they use these materials, this is called the gender-bred person. Gender identity is on a scale from woman to man, gender queer in between, gender expression, feminine, androgynous, masculine, biological sex, female, intersex, male, sexual orientation, heterosexual. Do you think they're targeting adults with this? And look at this one. This is called the gender unicorn. And they're using this. Gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, physically attracted to, emotionally attracted to. All of this done under the guise of attending an art club. Well, our favorite head of the White House Office of Truth and Lying, mostly lying, was interviewed on a podcast recently. And here's what she had to say about her feelings about these laws that are being enacted in states to prohibit the use of puberty blockers and that type of thing. So here she is, and she quit. Friday was her last day, so you won't see too many more of these in her role as a White House press secretary. But here is Cruella von Zuckerberger, also known as Jen Psaki, talking about how she feels about this.
The political games and harsh and cruel attempts at laws that we're seeing in some states like Florida, that is not a reflection of the country moving to oppose LGBTQ plus communities. That is not what we see in data. That is not factual, and that is not where things stand. This is a political wedge issue and an attempt to win a culture war. And they're doing that in a way that is harsh and cruel to a community of kids, especially. I'm like going to get emotional about this issue because it's horrible. But but it's like kids who are bullied, and like all these leaders are taking steps to hurt them and hurt their lives and hurt their families. And you look at some of these laws in these states, and it is going after parents who are in loving relationships, who have kids. It's completely outrageous, but it is a wedge issue. Sorry, this is an issue that makes me completely crazy. But it is an issue that is a political wedge issue. It is not a reflection of where the country is.
Well, a large part of the country is there. Boy, we are divided, are we not? Anybody think that's going to go away, let's say, midterm elections? This was information that came out that during the pandemic, the CDC was buying geolocation information from people's cell phones to see if they were complying with lockdown and social distancing and that type of thing. Now, we should know this was coming. Remember, back at the beginning of this pandemic, back at spring break in 2020, the New York Times sometimes does a great job, and they had covered the use of geolocation data to show where all of the students had gone and traveled to Florida for spring break. And they could show, the big green clouds. And they've used this for protests in DC and elsewhere. And now it turns out that the CDC has been buying that data so they can track you. And so anybody who thinks you're not tracked, you're already tracked if you have a phone. There's data. I remember, I think it was Fox, they did a study where they took two phones, and one of them they took out the battery, and the other they turned it off, just turned it off. Well, the phone without the battery did almost as good a job of tracking the people as the phone that was shut off, because it's putting out that information. There was information, this was a publication from last year, COVID-19, make it the last pandemic. The independent, the independent panel, which is not really independent, but they call it independent. And you can see here's some of the pages from inside this publication. Recommendations for building the future, who needs to do what, when, elevate political leadership for global health to the highest levels to ensure leadership, financing, and accountability. Now, maybe the financing means, did you see the report this week that people in our public health structure had received royalties like the NIH and that type of thing, had received royalties totaling over $350 million. And they've been fighting the people, even though they're public employees and they're being paid for what they do publicly, so maybe they're going to do the financing. Do you think that's really going to happen? And some of them are already the highest compensated employees in our government. Here's another one. This one is, we got to put all this stuff together at the regional levels. If you could zoom out for a second on that. Invest in preparedness now to create fully functional capacities at the national, regional, and global level. Establish a new agile system. What's this one? Establish a new agile system for what? Surveillance, validation, and alerts. This is for the WHO. For who? It's like a Abbott and Costello routine. Who is going to do this? No, who is going to do this? That's right. Who to establish a new global system for surveillance based on full transparency by all parties, using state-of-the-art digital tools to connect information centers around the world and include animal and environmental health surveillance with appropriate protections of people's rights. I believed it until then. And here is another slide. Future declarations of a PHEIC by the WHO Director General should be based on the precautionary principle, where warranted, as in the case of respiratory infections. So they're moving forward on this. You may not know this, but one of our favorite people, William Gates, has a new book out. And he said it's, I'm trying to remember, he calls it germ. We need a full-time paid team whose job is to prevent pandemics. And he has a new book out called Preventing the Next Pandemic. And he did a TED Talk this week. I won't play you the clip of it, but somebody else posted a meme on Twitter or someplace that said, how to prevent the next pandemic. And you see someone in an orange jumpsuit, and he has a prisoner number on him. I think people are very creative. Even after COVID-19, Bill says, there's no global agency tasked with detecting and responding to the next disease outbreak. Bill Gates has a plan. It's called GERM. And it's global, I don't know what it's called. Each of the letters there means something. I forgot to look it up. But the World Health Organization is actually having a summit here in the next, I think it starts a week from today. And they put out this thing asking for strengthening WHO preparedness for and response to health emergencies. So they asked for comments. They asked for people to say, hey, what do you want to have done? And believe it or not, I know this may be hard to believe, I'm getting the cartoons they're playing in the children's ministry next door on my back screen there. So don't you dare turn around and look. And I hope that's not going out over the air. I don't know. So I'm doing the WHO asked for comments, and guess what? Here is information that was submitted by our government, the Biden administration, to the World Health Organizations. Can you zoom that out on my slide? So, thank you. And they submitted about 13 amendments that they would like to see I'm still watching I'm trying to figure out who they're teaching about. The Wi-Fi seems to be working. Oh, okay, that's fine. And so we've submitted all these amendments, and essentially this is something very concerning. Others on Pandemic War Room and other podcasts. I know Michelle Bachman was on a number of shows this week. Frank Gaffney's been doing a lot of work on it. Essentially what this will do, they're trying to do a pandemic treaty, and that will cede a lot of our sovereignty to the World Health Organization. This is very serious stuff. This is, I think Michelle said, this is a 5-alarm fire. This is more than a 5-alarm fire. And we really need to do that. So there were comments were allowed for like 2 hours, and I think there's places you can go to actually send in emails because they don't want the next pandemic. And so it's interesting that when the World Health Organization is trying to put in all these rules to deal with the next pandemic and how they're going to control everything and surveillance, then here comes the newspapers today. On the right is the Washington Post, and on the left is the New York Times. 1 million. We've reached 1 million dead. In the world, it's over 6 million, although the World Health Organization came out and said, well, it's really probably 3 times that number. It does seem that there's a lot of excess deaths right now, and there's a lot of fighting about what's the cause of the excess deaths. Some insurance companies are paying out 40% above what they've paid before. This is a little graphic that the New York Times put together about, this is to represent all the people that died. It's a very good, well done graphic at newyorktimes.com. And these supposedly represent, these little dots represent the 1 million people that died. And you can see how there were a few different, 3, 4 different waves of these things. And then this shows how they spread out across the country. Well done graphic. I'm all for graphics. In China, they've been locking everything down despite the fact that they are told that zero COVID is futile. They continue to lock everything down. There's also some rumors running around that Xi, the leader of China, may have an aneurysm. Don't know if that's true or not. It's just something that was passed around to me by a bunch of different people. So you've got to be careful these days. So please check and verify that one. I really don't know if it's true. I do know that there is tremendous discontent in China over his strict COVID policies. In fact, and they're clamping down. All the things we said about social credit and that type of thing are true. And in fact, this week, this is a headline from this morning, Hong Kong churches no longer off limits. This is from the Jerusalem Post. Hong Kong churches no longer off limits as Beijing tightens reins against dissent. And what did they do this week? Well, the Pope entered into a treaty with China that essentially ceded to China the ability to appoint cardinals of the Catholic Church within China. So there's no freedom of church and state or separation of church and state in China. The state runs the church. And then in Hong Kong this week, there's been one cardinal who has spoken out against this. He's 91 years old, and he was arrested and thrown in jail this week. And my understanding was without charges. 91 years old, because he was considered a threat to the regime. Even in North Korea now, they're having their first wave of COVID, and people don't know what's that going to cause. And in the midst of all this, we're having all of these. This is the supply chain part. India has had some problems with weather. Very, very hot weather for this early or late in the year. I think their seasons are reversed down there. Well, anyway, they're in the tropics, and they've had extremely hot weather, which is affecting their wheat crop, so much to the point that India, which is one of the biggest wheat-producing countries on the planet, has terminated exporting of wheat unless there are prior contracts to do so. That's only going to exacerbate the problems. And so there are people in certain parts of the world, they see what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, which is 30 to 40% of the world's wheat. And so they're trying to grow more wheat to overcome that. But we had a bad winter wheat season here in the United States, particularly down in Texas, where it was just a small percentage of what it normally is. It's already hot down in Texas pretty early. It was like up here, we went from a bad late winter to summer this week. It switched pretty quickly. And so there's, so people are saying, hey, Russia, would you let the grain out? And Russia hasn't really responded to that. And so what they're saying, here's in the, from the, I think this is from the Wall Street Journal, G7 to continue economic pressure on Russia to tackle the wheat war. And it's part of the war that's going on. So Samantha Power, who, one of our favorite leftists, if there's such a thing that could be called favorite leftist, who used to be the ambassador to the UN. Remember when she was there involved in that fiasco with Resolution 2334 after the election in 2020, where they sort of they didn't veto stuff because they're pro-Palestinian. They just, they needed to do it carefully. So they let this resolution go through. She was asked last week on This Week about food and what's going on.
Shortages all around the world. As the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, what more can be done to address those shortages?
Thank you for posing that question. It is just another catastrophic effect
You
of
think she didn't know
Putin's,
that question was coming?
Unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. As if the harms in Ukraine weren't enough. You have countries like in sub-Saharan Africa and in the Middle East, who get maybe 80, 90% of their wheat or their grain overall from Russia and Ukraine. And you see massive spikes in food prices. Food prices right now, George, globally are up 34% from where they were a year ago, aided substantially again by this invasion. So we've gone to Congress asking for a substantial increase in humanitarian assistance in order to be able to meet those needs. But we're also active, of course, in more than 80 countries around the world, well and apart from this crisis. So we're working with farmers to also increase their production so that you actually have more supply brought on market. Fertilizer shortages are real now because Russia is a big exporter of fertilizer. And even though fertilizer is not sanctioned, less fertilizer is coming out of Russia. As a result, we're working with countries to think about natural solutions like manure and compost. And this may hasten transitions that would have been in the interest of farmers to make eventually anyway. So never let a crisis go to waste, but we really do need this financial support from the Congress to be able to meet emergency food needs so we don't see the cascading, deadly effects of Russia's war extend into Africa and beyond.
Listening to you lay out these consequences, it's hard not to conclude that in some respects this has already become something of a world war.
Certainly in terms of effects, not confined to the horrors that the Ukrainian people are suffering, but our job is to look at it globally. We want also to maintain the kind of global unity I mentioned at the beginning and that everybody has seen. And Russia tries to take advantage of this and say, oh, it's the sanctions that are causing these high food prices. Not at all. It is Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
So never let a crisis go to waste. She actually said it out loud. Now they don't even hide it anymore. And she, to her credit, she acknowledges that we're in a world war. Certainly, at least in terms of the effects. But it has nothing to do with the sanctions that everybody's putting on Russia or anything. There's nothing to do that. And if it's nothing to do with that, then it almost seems like somebody's planning it. I mean, it's just too many things happening at all the same time. This is related to the Ministry of Truth. This is an article from Silke Carlo, who works for a watchdog organization in the UK, concerned about the law that's been enacted, the Online Safety Act that's been enacted in the UK, and the implications from that. And she says, don't expect Elon Musk to save you from this nonsense. And now we don't even know if Musk is going to buy Twitter. He seems to be backing off. What did the value of Twitter go down? $500 billion in the last week and a half? Not Twitter, Tesla went down. It was hundreds of billions of dollars. Apple is no longer the most valuable company on the planet. That's now Saudi Arabia and Aramco. So energy stocks seem to be pretty good. I'm not going to talk too much about this. I talked a little bit about it last week, and I'll include this in a future update or separate talk. The slippery slope to cyborg theocracy. And Joe Allen is a smart guy, and he writes about this and what he sees going on with transhumanism and the metaverse and that type of thing is that there's a religious aspect behind this. There's a spirituality thing that's going on. So when you look at certain performers, they'll come right out and say they're a witch. They're into the occult. You look at the things that someone like... See, when I see this, somebody says, what are you watching? And I'm like, don't really watch them. I just ran across it this week, and she sticks in my mind, Lady Gaga. And some of the stuff that she's done and has just been horrible from a theological, spiritual standpoint. It's awful. And so on the transhuman side, Joe Allen, and he's done some talks recently, writes at Singularity Weekly, or joebotxyz.substack.com, and he talks about it's a short leap from smoke signals to brain chips. Great article. Techno-optimists, I'll just read a paragraph or two. Techno-optimists like to say humans are already cyborgs awaiting their next upgrade. Yesterday it was smartphones, today it's virtual reality goggles, and tomorrow, the brain chip. With each new device, our evolution toward human-machine symbiosis accelerates. That's obvious when you ask someone for directions and they pull out their phone. Techno-pessimists largely agree. Tech companies are turning us into cybernetic organisms. The difference is we're not stoked about it. Even if progress really is inevitable, there's no sense in getting all giddy about nuclear warheads or trans children or smartphone dependency. In light of their vices and virtues, some cultures are better than others. It's true that humans are tool users by nature, but you have to choose your tools wisely. All technologies fall on a spectrum, albeit with discrete punctuation, from cave painting to the printing press to electrodes that write memes directly onto your wiggling brain cells. Every person has to draw their own lines. And he references an article by Grimes, who was, she's had a couple children with Elon Musk. I don't think they ever married. They're not together now. They did have a second child by surrogacy. And it says this, Grimes, a mutated generation. Of all the cyber saints in media, from Bill Gates to Lady Gaga, few are as honest as the techno-pagan pop starlet Grimes. A bit of a dingbat, sure, but candid nonetheless. You can see why Elon Musk sired 2 children with her, a son named XAEA-12, and their daughter, Exa Dark, EXA Dark, Siderel, Siderael, born via surrogate mother. Last week she explained in an interview to Lex Fridman, we are becoming cyborgs, like our brains are fundamentally changed. Everyone who grew up with electronics, we are fundamentally different from previous Homo sapiens. I call us a Homo techno. I think we've evolved into a Homo techno, which is like essentially a new species. So we've controlled evolution now, and that's why from a 2015 talk, I played the clip before of Yuval Harari, who's one of the most popular speakers that the World Economic Forum has ever had, where he talks about transhumanism. We can hack humanity, and we will have people who will become useless because they won't serve any function anymore, because we'll do everything by robots and cyborgs and that type of thing. And what are we going to do with these useless human beings? So he goes to a talk at Google headquarters back in 2015, and he says, I love coming to Silicon Valley. You saw the clip. I played it a couple weeks ago. I love coming to Silicon Valley because this is where what? Now, he's an atheist. He's down on Christianity. But I love coming to Silicon Valley because this is where the religions that will control humanity in the 21st century are being created. It's a spiritual aspect to this. And ultimately, that thing is demonic. So again, this is all part of the convergence and acceleration. Well, we have this, this is an article from the Times of London last week. Narcissism is fueling a new age of mythology. And this person, secular, I believe, I don't know if he's a Christian, but he just said, listen, astrology, tarot card reading, all of these pagan things are coming back, and all we're thinking about is ourselves, and it's fueling a new age of mythology. And watch the latest Marvel comic movies that come out and the spiritual aspect of what's there. You don't like what you are, we'll make you into a superhuman being. And so the world's been conditioned for this. Now, we had the leak of the Roe versus Wade opinion. This is a Wisconsin organization, Right to Life organization in Madison, Wisconsin, that was firebombed. It was interesting. Some newspaper articles that covered it said about this, says fire breaks out at the Wisconsin headquarters. Like that nasty fire. It's always running around, just looking for a place. But it was arson. Everybody knew that it was arson. And it's done to intimidate. Now, Julian Appling, she was on Stand Up for the Truth the other day, and she said, we're not backing down. We're going to clean up and continue to do what God has called us to do in this regard, which is save young lives and counsel mothers. This was spray painted on the wall outside. You know, the fire broke out, and I guess it spray painted itself on the wall. Said this, if abortions aren't safe, then you aren't either. Here's a protest outside of Chief Justice Roberts' house the other day in, I don't know, Chevy Chase or whatever, Maryland. Even though there's a federal law that says you can't go to federal judges' houses to get to do this. It's not allowed. Even if there wasn't a law, common decency would say, let the court decide. And if you don't like it, file an appeal or try to change the law through the legislature, if that's possible. And this is, I think this is the last clip today of our now no longer around. Interesting that she flew out of Washington on Friday the 13th. Was her last day. I don't know if she flew out, but she could have. So here's what she said when somebody asked her about, well, what about there's laws against this, Jen? And here's what Cruella had to say.
I do want to ask as well, I mean, the Department of Justice was very swift in responding to school board members who felt like they were being harassed and intimidated a couple months back. Does the president feel that the demonstrations outside of, say, Justice Alito's home, are those attempts to interfere or intimidate?
Well, I think I said yesterday, but I'm happy to repeat because I think it's important for everybody to hear, that the president's long-standing view has been that violence, threats, and intimidation of any kind have no place in political discourse. And we believe, of course, in peaceful protest. What I do find is interesting, and I think many people have noted, is that there are voices on the right who have called out this protests that are happening while remaining silent for years on protests that have happened outside of the homes of school board members, the Michigan Secretary of State, or including threats made to women seeking reproductive health care, or even an insurrection against our Capitol. So I know that there's an outrage right now, I guess, about protests that have been peaceful to date, and we certainly continue to encourage that outside of judges' homes, and that's the president's position, but the silence is pretty deafening about all of the other intimidation that we've seen to a number of people.
This is a pending court case, though. That's where the federal law comes into place. This is a pending court case.
Well, but I think that intimidation and protests and intimidation outside of the homes of school board members, the Michigan Secretary of State, intimidation and threats against people seeking legal reproductive health care and against our Capitol and American democracy also warrant some outrage, and we haven't really seen that. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Get out of here. But the person that's replacing her is even worse. I mean, she is a radical's radical. So somebody said, hey, there's a law. Well, but so this is what they do when they're lying. They don't answer the question. You can almost guarantee when they don't answer the question, they're lying. So they brought Janet Yellen up to Capitol Hill because, of course, she's the Treasury Secretary. And it's not like we have a problem with, food inflation and interest rates and housing market bubbles and the stock market going down. They had to ask her about, what do you think about the decision that might overrule Roe and Casey? And so here's Senator Bob Menendez, Senate committee, asking her a question, and here is Yellen's response.
Secretary Yellen, if the draft of the court's majority holding in Roe versus Wade is the actual decision, what impact will the loss of abortion access mean economically for women?
Well, I believe that eliminating the right of women to make decisions about when and whether to have children would have very damaging effects on the economy and would set women back decades. Roe v. Wade and access to reproductive health care, including abortion, helped lead to increased labor force participation. It enabled many women to finish school. That increased their earning potential. It allowed women to plan and balance their families and careers. And research also shows that it had a favorable impact on the well-being and earnings of children. There are many research studies that have been done over the years looking at the economic impacts of access or lack thereof to abortion, and it makes clear that denying women access to abortion increase their odds of living in poverty or need for public assistance.
For half of the population of America, eliminating a right that has existed for half a century, particularly for low-income and minority women who have already shouldered much of the burden from the COVID pandemic, would be a disaster.
So the studies show that 80% of Planned Parenthood clinics are in minority neighborhoods. We are against that. Well, you're a racist. And I saw an article, it was the Times or Post or some big newspaper. Overturning of Roe will disproportionately affect black women. Well, yeah, because you put your clinics there to get rid of their babies. That's abhorrent to us. That's awful. That's evil. That's vile. I think Janet Yellen had some talking points there. I just was kind of getting that impression. By the way, if overturning Roe will decrease labor participation of women, or participation of women in the labor force. Guess what? Overturning Roe will create babies who can participate in the labor force. Man. So then one of the next senators up was Senator Tim Scott from North Carolina, who himself is the child of a single black mother, now senator from North Carolina, and he got the question, Secretary Yellen.
In the end, I think framing it in the context of labor force participation it just feels calloused to me. I'm just surprised that we find ways to weave into every facet of our lives such an important and painful reality for so many people, to make it sound like it's just another 0.4% added to our labor force participation as a result of the issue of abortion. Just, to me, seems harsh.
Well, I certainly don't mean to say what I think the effects are in a manner that's harsh. What we're talking about is whether or not women will have the ability to regulate their reproductive situation in ways that will enable them to plan lives that are fulfilling and satisfying for them. And one aspect of a satisfying life is being able to feel that you have the financial resources to raise a child, that the children you bring into the world are wanted, and that you have the ability to take care of them. In many cases, abortions are of teenage women, particularly low income and often black, who aren't in a position to be able to care for children, have unexpected pregnancies.
She was the head of the Federal
deprives them
Reserve.
of the ability off.
I gotta shut that off. She headed the Federal Reserve. You know, the one that's been printing all this money, the one that printed all the money that caused inflation. She's got a full-paying job. She's going to have a nice big government pension to go with the tens of millions of dollars she made while she was head of the Federal Reserve. Funny how that worked. Here's Congressman, the last one, you got to listen to this. This is Katie Porter, Democratic Congresswoman from Orange County, California, talking about her views on The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC. It should be MSCCP, I think, is the way you should call it. But listen to what she has to say. This is awful.
President Biden has said that inflation is the #1 priority for the Biden White House to try to get under control right now. As you're out there in California talking to constituents during this re-election year for Congress, how does inflation compare to this newly important, in the sense of the Supreme Court decision pending, abortion issue? How do those two issues compare?
Well, I don't think they compare. I think they actually reinforce each other. So the fact that things like inflation can happen and it can become more expensive to feed your kids and to fuel your car is exactly why people need to be able to be in charge of how many mouths they're going to have to feed. So I think the fact that we're seeing this jump in expenses, that we're seeing people having to pay more in the grocery store, pay more at the pump, pay more for housing, is a reason that people are saying, I need to be able to make my own decisions about when and if to start a family. So I don't think we're going to see them. I don't think it's like about comparing them or contrasting them. I think they reinforce for people just how big of a responsibility it is to take care of a family.
So if you got too many mouths to feed, get rid of them. So, look, I'm hesitant to say this because I'll get on some list, but if anybody runs against her, contact me. I might send you some money. Thousands protest across the U.S. to start Summer of Rage to defend abortion rights. And here's a rally yesterday at the Washington Monument. I'll let you draw your own conclusions about what that all symbolizes. This is pretty bad. Justice Thomas at a conference this week said, hey, the Roe leak has destroyed trust at the court. Looking over your shoulder now, you don't trust anybody. And one institution that people trusted a little bit, he said, look, I was friends with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, didn't agree with her, but she wouldn't do anything like this. And now they're running around saying it was a conservative that leaked it, And I don't think that's true. They need to issue that decision right away and get it over with. Okay, let's talk about the war in Ukraine quickly. Russian battalion wiped out trying to cross the River of Death. They used sort of satellite intel. Russia's upset. They're threatening, NATO is looks like NATO might expand. Finland and Sweden want to join. So the Kremlin is saying, they're threatening nuclear war. I don't know that this is a great cartoons from the Times of London. I'm warning you, Finland. You see the look. I don't want to make too much light of it, but Finland, they're saying, hey, we're going to file a NATO application within days. Sweden also wants to be in. Russia's criticizing the move. They're threatening nuclear war. Nobody else is threatening nuclear war right now, but I think people are fomenting war too. I mean, the amount of money that's been sent to Ukraine by the United States exceeds like a decade of what we've sent to Israel. A decade's worth. It's insanity. And there was a Democratic congressman that said, well, we need to realize we're at war with Russia. Well, did you guys vote to declare war? There's a provision in our Constitution. You might want to read that, swore an oath to it. And this is what I don't understand. Russia's angry. I don't think the thing is going as well as Russia would like, but this is the thing that I think is kind of doesn't make a lot of sense, because Putin says, well, I'm going into Ukraine because you may move the NATO border right onto our border. So, before the war, you can see that they had this little border with the Baltic states. that was directly on Russia and a little bit of Finland. And now, Finland and Sweden want to join. So that's going to add like 830 miles to the border. And then Ukraine, that would add even more. And so if your goal is to not have NATO on your border, you seem to be doing the exact opposite. Now, here to the rescue, this guy is the biggest opportunist on the planet. Erdogan has come in and said, I'm against, to join NATO, it requires unanimous consent. And he says, I'm not for it, and I won't approve it. And Russia's engaged in economic war. They've shut off gas. They've cut gas supplies. EU prices are going up. Kremlin even halted electricity supply to Finland over the NATO expansion issue. Again, they've had some issues. They've pushed Russia back. Russia's retreated. Now some people say, I don't even know if they're going to be able to take over the Donbass, which is what they wanted to originally. Ukraine has made some gains there. And this is sort of an interesting thing that plays into Bible prophecy, because we know there are wars in Bible prophecy. And, Ezekiel uses the term great company and mighty army. And we always wonder, well, what is that? What's a mighty army? And so here, there's like an app, like an Uber-type app that they're able to use to geolocate the Russian troops and take them out. And they destroyed 70 tanks and a bunch of armored carriers and killed a lot of people. And now Russia, which doesn't have a huge population, 144 million people, 200 million less than the United States has, before the latest immigration figures were in. But 200 million less. Their economy is the size of, maybe less than Texas and Florida combined. Now they have nuclear weapons, and that's the big game changer. So now they have these apps that can use to figure out, and these drones, a lot of which come from Turkey, or made by Turkey, are taking out these Russian military positions. Here's a Russian commander, military advisor, said if the West declares war on Russia, sends forces to Ukraine, this would mean all-out war. Russia's nukes are capable of destroying many countries. And I played you the clips. I played you the clip of Vladimir Putin. We think we're threatened, we'll use nukes, and you will go to hell and we'll go to paradise. We'll all be dead, and you'll be in hell. Now, listen, and always, get emails from people, oh, you don't understand Putin. And it's like, I do. I've been reading and studying this guy for decades. So here he was at the military parade on May 9th, last Monday, celebrate the 70 the victory over Germany. May 9th, 1945. And here's a little bit of their military parade and things that they had. And, they have an alliance with China. China's upgrading their nuclear capabilities. And I don't want to dismiss the fact that people are threatening nuclear war. China is threatening Taiwan. And what are we going to do? Now, by the way, even though what you see here in this video is rather impressive in terms of the number of troops, here's Shoigu, who reportedly had to have open heart surgery, had a heart attack after the Ukraine war started. He disappeared for a while. He's back. He's the head of the Russian Defense Ministry. The other guy from the Defense Ministry is the guy who sort of ran the thing in Syria, is now running the thing in Ukraine. But it's just not, it's really, I think objectively you have to say it's not going as well as Putin would have liked. There's word coming out of different places that Putin has blood cancer. But I think you can see from some of the way he was walking around in this particular video, he didn't look super ill to me. But I'm not a Putin watcher, so I can only go, here's one of their big Satan nuclear missile. They're threatening to use their Poseidon, which is an underwater nuclear-powered torpedo. And so they're rolling it out. And now North Korea is going to do the same thing. China's threatening it. And Defense One has said this. It almost goes without saying that China is a fundamentally different kind of superpower and different kind of rival than Russia. China's economic ties with most of the countries of the world dwarf the ties they have with Russia. With a few exceptions in Northeast Asia, fear of a Russian threat rather than affinity to the United States seems to be a better explanation for why they have lined up against Russian aggression. The further countries are from Russia, the less they care. And that raises a very serious question. Is there any reason to think that the world would line up with the United States in a future conflict with China? I don't know. That was an article from Defense One. This is Ross Douthat, who writes in the New York Times this morning, pushing back Russia risks nuclear escalation. And he's right. I mean, this is a big deal. More about China, they're strictly limiting citizens from going abroad amid a Charlie vector outbreak in China. And there's some questions now about, Xi, who was just at the height of his power 2 or 3 months ago. Now they're saying, boy, he's got some bad choices now. Will he survive politically? And this kind of raises that other part, acceleration, convergence, logistics thing of Bible prophecy. So all of a sudden here is Putin, maybe blood cancer, maybe he's going, Xi might have an aneurysm, he's going. And everything's changed in like 2 months. And in 2 years, even more. And it just shows how quickly an Antichrist figure could arise in the world. That's kind of interesting. So let's look at the Middle East. Okay, so, there's this thing about the Temple Mount. And let me see what I want to talk about. I'll talk about this quickly. This relates to Turkey and Erdogan. There's a problem in the Middle East, and people are, what do we do with Turkey? Erdogan seems to be sticking his finger in everything. I moved one slide out of order. And so this is an article from Daily Sabah about 5 years ago, talking about the fact that there's a water problem in the Middle East. And Turkey's controlling a lot of the water. They're sort of the Saudi Arabia of water in the Middle East. And I sort of came across this in a report in the Tehran Times. This says a woman and a boy walk on the dried up riverbed of the Zayenden Rud River that no longer runs under the 400-year-old bridge that's named because it has 33 arches in Isfahan, Iran. That's from back in 2018. And so the foreign minister there came out and criticized Turkey and Afghanistan, saying, you guys are taking all the water. And when you go and research it, you find all of these Turkey dam building projects. This is from 4 years ago. Turkey's dam building could create new Middle East conflict. It shows dams that they've put on the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. This is a Lisu Dam, part of the Southeastern Anatolia project, which began filling in 2019. I talked about this. It's a huge dam, and it's damming up the Tigris River. A German ecologist said this dam is a weapon against the lowlands. It was planned and now is being built in a way they can hold back the whole Tigris for a long time. If you see water as a weapon, dams are the new cannons. Iraq has the oil, Turkey has the water, and sometimes it's much better to have the water. And this is an ancient city in southeast Turkey that will be underwater once this dam continues filling. And so you see these interesting, there's a website called SaveTheTigris.org, and it talks about this is what Turkey's using against the Kurds, these dams. And so it looks like a lot of the water comes from Turkey. They contribute most of it, and they have it, and they're going to keep it. as one Turkish leader before Erdogan came on the scene, said, hey, we'll drink our water, you drink your oil. And so you see these dam systems. This is the Ataturk Dam on the Euphrates. And they can stop the flow of the Euphrates. And it says the Euphrates will dry up in Revelation to prepare the way for the kings of the east. So these are some of the dams. This is what led to crisis in Syria. Blue gold will be Turkey's key to the Dry Crescent. And there was a Defense Intelligence Agency publication about 11 years ago that talked about global water security. There's not much fresh water on the planet. Oceans are 97.5% of the water, but fresh water is only 2.5%. And about 20% of the fresh water on the planet's in the Great Lakes, 2 hours north of here. And the world is running out of water. There's also the situation of oil. This is the Eastern Mediterranean. These are oil fields in Egypt and countries in the Eastern Mediterranean. Notice one thing you don't see is you don't really see much in the way of oil with regard to Turkey. Now, they might have some up in the Black Sea, but it's insignificant. And so Erdogan has stepped in. Erdogan is, his military and he have developed this doctrine called Turkey's blue water. And you see the bright blue water, that's what they claim is their water. That way they have more coastal area. And they're using that to interfere with the building of pipelines and that sort of thing. They have, they control, this is a picture of the Bosphorus ship going through there, and they've shut that down. But Erdogan says, hey, listen, build your pipeline into Israel. You got the Leviathan field. Don't spend billions of dollars. Just build up through the Mediterranean by Syria. We'll take care of you, and then we can, connect it into all of our little branches that we have and send it on to Europe, and you don't need to spend $10 billion. Oh, by the way, we need a cut of the revenue to do that. And so here's what that sort of the pipeline connection would look like. I don't know if this is going to happen. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. This pipeline here, that project, 9,000 feet deep ocean. It will take years to build. They don't have the facilities to do it by liquefied natural gas. So the question, it's not going to solve the problem in Europe now that's developed because of the war with Russia. It's just not going to fix it in the short term. But it does give Erdogan a lot of power. Okay, now let me go over the Middle East stuff pretty quickly here. So this is front page Washington Post, Guardian, the funeral of a Palestinian journalist. She's 51 years old, been a journalist for 25 years. She was killed, and there was a shootout between Israelis and some of the Arabs near Jenin. They were trying to do a mopping up operation. She was killed. Nobody knows who fired the bullet that killed her. The Palestinians have the bullet. They won't release it. Everybody says Israel can't do a return. Here's a CBS News short report on what happened and then what happened at the funeral.
Troubled by the actions of Israeli police for, quote, intruding into the funeral procession of a Palestinian-American journalist. Today, President Biden called for an investigation into her killing. Here's CBS's Roxana Severi.
She worked for Al Jazeera.
A day meant to mourn the death of journalist Shireen Abu Akleh turned tense when Israeli police suddenly moved in, swinging their batons. At one point, the pallbearers, trying to reach a church in Jerusalem, nearly dropped the casket. The police say rioters had hurled stones and other objects at them. But the White House is calling these images disturbing.
This is a day where we should all be marking, including everyone there, the memory of a remarkable journalist who lost her life. We regret the intrusion into what should have been a peaceful procession.
Wearing body armor clearly marked press, the Al Jazeera journalist was shot on Wednesday. while covering an Israeli raid in the West Bank town of Jenin. Israel initially suggested she was killed by Palestinian gunmen, but today the military said it can't unequivocally determine the source of the fatal gunshot. Violence has surged here in recent months, with at least 16 Israelis killed by Palestinians since March, and around 30 Palestinians reportedly killed in confrontations with Israeli forces. The funeral of Abu Akleh, who was widely respected in the Arab world, eventually took place today mostly peacefully. Thousands of Palestinians said goodbye to a woman they now see as a martyr.
What do you think she would have made?
So that's the problem. This was a editorial cartoon from, I think, the Jordanian Al Ghad newspaper. Here's some more sort of pictures about what's, as a sort of a close-in view of some of the dispute. This is the other picture on the right, the video on the right is outside the Jaffa Gate, as they were trying to get her coffin to, you can kind of see it there in the picture, to the church. But you see now part of the reason, the word that I've seen is that the family didn't want this type of procession, but they came and got the coffin and did it anyway. And then it kind of deteriorated from there. But I saw videos of them throwing rocks, big rocks, at the Israeli soldiers. So this is, she was an activist. She was very anti-Israel in her reporting. You need to know that. Here is... So this has become a big flashpoint in Israel. Some of the pictures of the scene there, all the newspapers are weighing in. She's called a martyr. Al-Quds newspaper in London, she was targeted. She was the embodiment of truth. The Palestinians as people, factions, and officially turned the painful crime into the largest wave of condemnation of the occupation. They were also able to make the event a tool to unite them as citizens, parties, religion, and geography. There's another editorial cartoon. You see Dome of the Rock in the back. You can see Al-Aqsa Mosque and churches, a church of the Holy Sepulchre. Of course, the EU, Human Rights Watch, Human Rights Organization came out and condemned it. The killing of Abu Akleh is another serious attack on media freedom. This is today's Jerusalem Post. Everybody's against the violence. Caroline Glick has a great article in Friday's Israel. Hey, you can go get it at carolineglick.com and read it, talking about Mansour Abbas, who's been running back and forth. She says he's the Muslim Brotherhood minister in Israel right now, and he is. He's part of Muslim Brotherhood. He's been running over to Jordan, and of course, this is King Abdullah, who was in Israel Friday, meeting at the White House with President Biden in advance of a Biden trip to Israel in June. And the word is that at that report, or the reports are that in that trip that Biden will go to a hospital in East Jerusalem without Israeli security. And why is that being done? Because they're trying to endorse the two-state solution. This is a clear agenda that they have. There's a great article in the Jerusalem Post the other Friday. Let me see if I can find it here. By David Weinberg. No, that's not it. Let's see here. I have so many articles. I mean, watching this stuff is just incredible. Is this Weinberg's article? Nope. Well, David Weinberg, who works with the IDSF, Israeli Defense and Security Forum, wrote a very good article in the, it's before this one. That's Jonathan Spires. Sorry about this. Here it is. Stop Jordanian false claims in Jerusalem. So Jordan's running around saying, hey, we control the Temple Mount. We're a custodian of the Temple Mount. We control everything there. And that's just not true. But I've been saying this for years, that this is the way Abdullah acts. So this is who Biden met with yesterday. You think Biden said anything about, hey, bub, back off on your claims? He doesn't say that. And a lot of security experts say if there's a two-state solution, it's actually be a four-state solution. You have Gaza, West Bank, and Jordan. I guess it'd be a three-state solution. Jordan will fall. Jordan will go down the tubes because they're 80% Palestinian. And so here's at the Valdez dialogues a few years ago, this is what Abdullah says. Notice he never mentions Israel's rights relative to the Temple Mount.
Above all, we need to ensure young people have hope. The subject of hope brings me to the core crisis of our region and the world, and that is the denial of a Palestinian state. Jordan and Russia agree on the urgent need for a two-state solution. Our region will not enjoy broad security and stability until the Palestinian-Israeli conflict ends, and that cannot happen without a two-state solution that provides real peace in accord with international law and UN resolutions, an end to the conflict, a viable, independent, sovereign Palestinian state on the June 4th, 1967 lines, with East Jerusalem as its capital, but living side by side with Israel in mutual peace and security. A deep and shared concern for all of us is safeguarding Jerusalem, its holy sites and the historic Muslim and Christian presence in the city.
So there's
a deep and shared concern for all of us is safeguarding Jerusalem, its holy sites and the historic Muslim and Christian presence in the city. Through the Hashemite custodianship of Islamic and Christian holy sites, Jordan is working to maintain peace and diffuse tensions.
So this is what he says. This is an interesting thing. So if you ever go to Israel and you're driving out of Jerusalem on Highway 60 and you look up the hill, this is called Gibeah, or Gibeon. If you look at it, it's on the map here. It's in the tribal area of Benjamin, just north of Judah. And so this site, I'm fascinated by it. When we go back to Israel, I'm going to go there. What is this? I've mentioned it a couple times before. This will give you the mindset of Abdullah II because he's got the mind of his father. Back in 1965, they broke ground on this. What was it? It was to be a summer palace for the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan on one of the highest, maybe the highest point in the Jerusalem area. Now, why would they build it there, and why did they stop? It's been like this since 1967 war. Israel won the war. This stopped, but it stood there unbuilt, unfinished. It was to be the palace of the Jordanian king. Why is the site important? The site it was the capital of the tribe of Benjamin. What tribe was the first king of Israel, Saul, from? The tribe of Benjamin. In other words, this is the tribal capital of the tribe of Benjamin, the first king of Israel. That's why they were building the palace there, to make a statement. Hey, we're in charge. We built a palace on top of where your first king grew up. We're in charge. This is how they think. So it sits there. I'm fascinated by the site for some reason. So he claims we run the Temple Mount, and he doesn't. This is just a complete lie. And you should know that the Hajjman al-Husseini, who was a friend of a certain German leader back in the 1930s and helped him get together his final solution, may have been the uncle of a guy named Yasser Arafat. And so this is an article from Institute for National Security Studies, Tel Aviv University, the struggle for de facto sovereignty over the Temple Mount. All this coming at the time Biden's considering a visit to East Jerusalem. And when he met with him, this is the readout from the meeting that he had with Abdullah in Washington at the White House the other day. The president affirmed his strong support for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and cited the need to preserve the historic status quo at the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount. The president also recognized the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan's crucial role as the custodian of Muslim holy places in Jerusalem. So this is, and so Caroline, she goes off pretty strongly in this article about how this is just a very bad thing. Also, you need to know that Assad visited Tehran for the second time since the beginning of the war back in 2011. This is very significant diplomatically, and even the people, they said it was a surprise visit, but he came for the second time in a decade. Assad paid an unannounced visit to Iran, and he met with high-ranking Iranian officials, Ayatollah Khamenei and President Raisi. And you don't get any higher than that. Last visit was in 2018, and guess who made the arrangements for his prior visit? Soleimani, the great Soleimani, who's sort of the epicenter, according to an article in the Tehran Times this week. He's sort of everybody recognizes him as the Iranian father of the Palestinian movement to have their own independent state. So Alma Research, and actually here's a video of Assad. Meeting with his Iranian friends. Very significant. So here's the uptake of all of this. So Alma Research, Alma Research and Education Center based in the north of Israel, up along the Lebanon border. Russia's military deployment in Syria and the Israeli challenge. And they look at sort of the things that are going on, like Russia's primary bases in Syria. And the word is that because things are going bad in Ukraine, troops and Syrian militias are being shifted to Ukraine to fight there, some as mercenaries. And some of the bases are being handed over to Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So that increases the security situation for Israel. They've even, Syria and Russia had flown some joint patrols down along the Golan Heights, not into Israeli airspace, but they were doing a show of force. That happened in January, and I think it happened last year as well. This is a good article from the Center for Security Policy, Israel's F-35 development. They have their own fighter. If they could get tankers from the U.S., I mean, we're giving everything in the world to Ukraine. Why can't we sell tankers to Israel? Because a bunch of anti-Israel people are in charge now. And they're going to do the same thing. So this is, if they had the tankers, they could keep these things in the air for 12 hours, which means they could attack you-know-what. And they're looking to design drop tanks so they can extend their range and fly. Let's see. Goodness. So listen, Jonathan Spire wrote about this visit of Assad to Syria in Friday's Jerusalem Post. Go get the article. But what Jonathan Spire says, listen, is anybody who thinks that, Iran's just going to sort of shrink away from its investments in Syria is sorely mistaken. He concludes the article with this statement: as Assad's visit to Tehran this week demonstrated hopes that the dictator himself or Russia or some combination thereof can be induced to leverage the Iranians out of Syria, remain at odds with the observable reality. And Jonathan's exactly right. Go get the article. It's excellent analysis of the situation. And I'll just, Caroline Glick was at the Endowment for Middle East Truth, and they were talking about the situation in Israel. And here's just a couple minutes of that, and I promise I will finish with this.
Now the latest report on this topic is that during Biden's trip to the region next month, in a historic first, he is planning to make a stop at a Palestinian hospital in East Jerusalem, unaccompanied by Israeli officials, something that one Israeli journalist characterized as being, quote, a form of recognition that Jerusalem is divided, which is a complete reversal of Trump's policy. Do you believe the administration is actually anti-Israel? And what do Israelis more broadly feel about the U.S. as a reliable and consistent ally since Biden entered office?
Thanks so much for that question. I don't have right before me any polling data on it, but Biden is not considered pro-Israel by Israelis, and rightly so. His administration is the most anti-Israel administration we've ever seen. And this is true for a combination of reasons. I mean, in all aspects, in all major policies, Biden's policies are a continuation of the Obama administration's policies. So you could say, well, then he's just as hostile as Obama was, but he's not, because the Democratic Party in the intervening 5 years has become far more hostile to Israel, and as a result, the kind of buffers that you had, or the kind of blocks that you had acting on Obama in terms of empowered or more powerful moderates in the Democratic Senate or House majorities are much less powerful today. Their voices are not heard. And they have a much harder time fighting for pro-Israel policies. And, it's interesting because the Rashida Tlaibs and Ilhan Omars and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who are openly anti-Israel and in certain cases in regards also openly anti-Semitic, are the minority in the Democratic caucus in the House. But Nancy Pelosi, who is not anti-Israel, is not anti-Semitic, gives them the rule of the roost. And so she's just given them the leadership of policy in determining the policy direction of the Democrats in the House. And as a result, they do.
So if you want to hear all that interview, it's about an hour long. And I recommend you subscribe to Caroline's YouTube channel. She's now partnered with JNS News Service, but Endowment for Middle East Truth, EMET, and then the attempts to degrade Israel's Temple Mount sovereignty, great article in the Jerusalem Post about the problems of things that are going there, and that this is a big issue. I just want to make one more point. So the Turkey-Iran water issue. Okay, Turkey is also doing things like they're putting out, we're going to return 1 million refugees to northwest Syria. All of this creates tension between Turkey and Iran. And so the question is, go read Daniel 8 today. Daniel 8 talks about a conflict, between the ram and the goat. I sort of lean to the conclusion that this is a conflict between Turkey and Iran in the end times. And you see that building. You see the water issue. You see the conflict in Syria. Now you see a conflict over the Kurds because Iran's trying to use the Kurds, and Erdogan's trying to shut down water to the Kurds. And he's also trying to get the oil that the Kurds have. And that's about 30% of Iraq's oil. It's an oil-rich province. So there's a lot of different things going on that may play into Bible prophecy. And there's a dispute. Does Daniel 8, is it historical? I mean, was it a prophecy when Daniel made it and then it was fulfilled? Or is it something that's going to happen in the future? But there's a verse, I think it's verse 17 or 19 of Daniel chapter 8, that says that this is a prophecy for the end time. So I kind of take that to mean that it's a prophecy for the end time, and it's something that we need to look at, and it may play out as part of this whole end time thing, that there would be a conflict between Turkey and Iran. And I think you can see that happening. or at least the beginnings of it. So listen, there is a lot going on. So we know that all this plays into Bible prophecy. Famine, inflation, cost of things. The one thing I didn't mention, I don't know where my slides went for that, is probably the most troubling one of all, aside from the threats of nuclear war by Russia. That is very, very concerning to me. My concerns about that would probably exceed what people felt about the Cuban Missile Crisis back in 1962. I'm concerned about it. It's nothing to be trivialized. And our governments seem to be provoking it in many ways. And I don't know how we stop that at this point. I mean, unless we get, other people get control of Congress, but I think 75% of the Republicans voted for the aid package to Ukraine. That was like $40 billion. So at the same time, we have baby formula shortages in the United States. People can't find baby formula. We can send $40 billion to Ukraine, but we can't get baby formula for babies in America. The ones that have survived, getting out of their mother's womb. And then the biggest concern is there's a pretty big shortage of diesel. And I do not know. I was looking at gas prices on the Gas Buddy app. Pretty scary stuff, to be honest with you. Diesel fuel prices in California are above $6 a gallon. I filled up my car. I get pretty good gas mileage in my car, and I was in line ahead of a lady at Costco the other day, and she was filling up a Ford F-150, and she goes, "Oh man, that's $126 down the drain to fill up her truck." And diesel's even more, and now there are shortages of diesel appearing, and people are saying they don't know if the diesel supply is going to last. There's even concerns about, the utilities remember they had the big problem in Texas during the winter? The Texas utilities said, everybody turn your thermostat up to at least 78. Don't do wash or anything during certain hours of the day, because 6 generating facilities in Texas are having problems. And they need to shut down for maintenance. Well, look what happened. Remember what happened to Texas just, a year and a half ago? They they had blackouts and everything. Now they're expecting that, and there's shortages of electricity everywhere. And now the diesel. Well, what operates on them? We don't really need diesel, do we? Except for trains and trucks and everything else that brings everything to us. This could be a very, very difficult 6, 8, 10, 12 months. But look, God's in control, and we knew that things like this would happen. And so you're forewarned, and so act accordingly. But remember, God's in control. You always got to remember that. And he's not given us a spirit of fear. So be wise, act wisely. Let's pray. Lord, thanks so much for your word. We pray that you'll watch over us, give us wisdom to act in this day and age, but also give us the ability to stand up to evil and to speak truth to it and to share the gospel with these people, as painful as it might be and as unwelcome as that message might be. It is a message that the world desperately needs as the world gets ready for the return of your Son. Pray that you'll bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.